I cashed out my entire trust fund to save my husband from kidney failure. The night his transplant went perfectly. I walked into his recovery room and found him whispering to his college girlfriend about how he'd finally moved everything into her name. I stood in the doorway holding a bouquet of yellow roses. I didn't drop them. I didn't make a sound. I just turned around, walked down 2 flights of stairs, and knocked on his transplant coordinator's office door. By the time I sat down across from her, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 29 years old. I've been married for 4 years, and 3 weeks ago I was the kind of wife who thought selling everything she owned to keep her husband alive was the obvious choice. I grew up in a small town outside Asheville. My grandfather started a furniture company in the 1950s, and when he died, he left a trust to me and my 2 cousins. Mine was substantial. Not generational wealth substantial, but the kind of money that means you don't worry about an emergency room bill. I never touched it. My husband and I lived on what we made. He was an architect at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. I worked as a project manager at a nonprofit. We had a little brick house in Plaza Midwood, a rescue dog named Biscuit, and a routine that I thought was happiness. Then last March, my husband collapsed at his desk. By the time I got to the hospital, the nephrologist was already talking about end-stage renal disease. His kidneys had been failing for years, apparently. He'd hidden the symptoms from me. He'd hidden the doctor visits, the lab work, the early dialysis consultations. He told me later that he hadn't wanted me to worry. I believed him then. I want to write that down because I want to remember what kind of fool I was. He needed a transplant. He wasn't a match for me. He wasn't a match for his mother or his older brother. The waiting list in our region was, on average, 4 to 7 years. He didn't have 4 to 7 years. He had maybe 12 months on aggressive dialysis before his heart started giving out. There was a private living donor program out of a hospital in Houston that had a paired exchange chain with much faster turnaround, but it was outside our insurance network. The estimate, just for the surgery in the first year of immunosuppressants, was just over $400,000. I called my financial advisor that same afternoon. I sold everything. The trust holdings, the small inheritance from my grandmother, even the engagement diamond my husband had given me, which I'd never been sentimental about anyway. I told my advisor I wanted it liquid in 2 weeks. He asked me 3 times if I was sure. I was sure. My husband cried when I told him. He held my hand against his face and said he didn't deserve me. He said when this was over he was going to spend the rest of his life making it up to me. He said it twice. I want to remember the exact words. He said, "Whatever happens, whatever I have left, every dollar of it is yours. You saved my life." The match came through faster than anyone expected. A woman in Tulsa needed a kidney for her teenage son. Her husband was a match for someone in Houston, and the chain ran through my husband. The transplant happened on a Tuesday in late April. The surgeon came out and told me everything had gone beautifully. His new kidney was already producing urine on the operating table. I cried in the waiting room. I cried so hard a nurse brought me water and sat with me until my mother-in-law arrived from the hotel. I remember thinking I had never been so happy and so emptied out at the same time. He was in the ICU for 2 days. I slept in a chair next to him. I held his foot through the blanket because it was the only part of him I could reach without bumping a line. On the 3rd morning, they moved him to a recovery suite on the 7th floor. He was groggy but alert. He squeezed my hand. He said my name. He said, "I love you." I went home that night for the first time in 9 days. I showered for 45 minutes. I walked the dog. I slept 12 hours. The next afternoon, I drove back to the hospital with a fresh change of clothes for him, a thermos of his mother's chicken soup, and a bouquet of yellow roses, because they were the flowers I'd carried at our wedding. His door was cracked open. I could hear his voice. I could hear someone else's voice, too. A woman's voice, low and amused. I assumed it was a nurse. I was about to push the door the rest of the way open when I heard her say, "So it's all done. Everything's in my name now?" And then I heard my husband laugh. It was a real laugh, the kind he hadn't given me in over a year, and he said, "Everything that was hers, the house we're getting from the sale, the investment account, even the cabin in Linville, you don't have to worry about a thing." I stood in the hallway. I remember the wallpaper. It was that hospital pattern, the small repeating leaves. I remember counting them. I counted 36 leaves before I could breathe again. His college girlfriend was named Well, she's the one. I'll call her by what she was. His college girlfriend was a woman he had dated for 2.5 years in his early 20s. He told me about her early in our relationship. She'd left him for a financial advisor with a beach house in Wilmington. He'd been devastated. He told me she was the reason he didn't trust easily. He'd told me he was glad she was out of his life. I had seen her on his Instagram exactly twice in 4 years, both times in old group photos that he'd been tagged in by someone else. As far as I knew, he hadn't spoken to her since 2019. I pushed the door open. I don't know why. I think I wanted to see her face. She was sitting in the chair I had slept in. Her hand was on his hand. She turned and smiled at me. Not a guilty smile. A polite, neutral, almost pitying smile. My husband saw me and his expression did something I'll never forget. It went from caught to calculating to something approaching relief, all in about 2 seconds. Like he'd been waiting for this and now it was finally happening and he could stop pretending. I lifted the roses slightly the way you do when you're showing someone what you brought. I'll come back later, I said. I turned around. I walked down the hall. I took the stairs because I didn't want to wait for the elevator. I went down 2 floors and turned left at the second nurse's station, and I knocked on the door of the transplant coordinator's office. Her name was on a plaque. She was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked up at me and I think she saw my face and stopped typing. I said, I need to know what my legal obligations are for my husband's post-transplant care if I file for divorce this week. She didn't ask why. She set down her pen. She closed her laptop. She said, Sit down, honey. Closed the door. That was the moment my marriage actually ended, not in the hallway. In her office, with the door closed, when a stranger I'd met twice was the first person to treat me like a person who had options. I drove home that night and didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I had cried in the waiting room 3 days earlier from relief. I would cry plenty later. But that night I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I made a list. The list had 3 columns. What I owned, what he owned, what we owned together. The list was painfully short on the left side, painfully long on the right side. I had liquidated the trust into a joint account because at the time of the medical emergency we'd needed quick access from both of us. The cabin in Linville my grandmother had left me was technically in both our names because we'd refinanced it 2 years ago to do roof repairs and our bank had required it. The investment account he'd mentioned in the hospital room was an account I didn't recognize. I didn't have access to it. I called my older cousin. He's a corporate lawyer in Atlanta. I told him everything in one breath. He was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, Don't move out. Don't tell him you know. Don't sign anything. I'm driving up tomorrow. The next 4 weeks were the strangest performance of my life. My husband was discharged on a Friday. I picked him up. I helped him into the car. I drove him home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on his forearm because he was still sore from the incision. I made him the broth his nephrologist had recommended. I helped him into bed. I set up a little station next to him with his medications, his water bottle, a small bell I'd bought at a gift shop in case he needed me in the night. I slept on the couch because of his incision. He thanked me. He told me again, in that warm, raspy post-surgery voice, that I had saved his life. I smiled and told him to rest. In the morning, while he was still asleep, I went through his phone. He'd never had a passcode. He'd never thought he needed one with me. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm also not ashamed. I found 3 months of text messages with his college girlfriend that he'd been careful to delete from the main thread but had forgotten to clear from the backup folder. I found photos. I found a screenshot of a real estate listing in Wilmington. I found an email thread between him and a financial planner I'd never heard of, dated 6 weeks before his collapse, asking about the tax implications of receiving a large monetary gift from a spouse. I took screenshots of everything. I emailed them to an account my cousin had set up for me. Then I cleared the photos from my photo roll and put his phone back exactly where I'd found it. I'm telling you this so you understand what kind of man he was. He had known he was going into kidney failure. He had hidden it from me until he physically couldn't anymore. And in the months before he collapsed, while I was making him dinner and rubbing his feet because he was tired from work, he was already talking to a financial planner about how to receive the money I was about to spend saving him. The college girlfriend visited the house twice in the first week he was home. She came once with flowers, once with a casserole. My mother-in-law was there both times and was visibly uncomfortable. My husband introduced her to me with a straight face, like he had never said her name before in his life. He called her an old family friend. She extended her hand. I shook it. I said it was so kind of her to come. He's told me so much about you, I added. She blinked. My husband's face did a small thing. I excused myself to the kitchen and pretended to put the casserole in the oven. What I actually did was step out onto the back porch and breathe very slowly until my hands stopped shaking. Then I went back in and asked her if she wanted coffee. My cousin came up the following Saturday under the cover of a regular family visit. He brought his wife and their 2-year-old. He hugged my husband, asked about his recovery, sat in our living room for 2 hours making perfect small talk. Then he and I went for a walk around the block to give the toddler a chance to nap. On that walk, in the span of 22 minutes, my cousin told me what I needed to do. First, the cabin in Linville. The refinance had put both our names on the deed, but my grandmother's original will had structured it as a separate inheritance with a clause that protected it in cases of marital fraud. He needed to see the will. I texted my mom from the sidewalk and she said she could overnight the copy. Second, the joint account where my trust money had been deposited. Most of it had already gone to the hospital, but there was about $46,000 left, money I had earmarked for the first 18 months of immunosuppressants and follow-up care. That money was vulnerable. He could withdraw all of it any time. My cousin told me to move half of it into a new account in my name only today, before the end of business. The other half I should leave to avoid raising alarms. Third, the investment account I didn't know about. My cousin wanted me to look carefully. He thought it was likely my husband had been moving money out of our joint account into a private brokerage account in his name for months. If we could prove that, we could prove a pattern. We could prove premeditation. Fourth, and this was the hardest, my cousin said, don't confront him, don't accuse him, don't show him any cards. Be the perfect wife for 6 more weeks. Document everything. We are going to make sure that when this ends, he has nothing. I went home that night and made my husband his favorite pasta. He kissed the top of my head when I brought it to him in bed. He said, I don't know how I'd do this without you. I said, you won't have to find out. The next morning, I went to the bank and opened a new account in my name only. I moved $23,000 into it. The teller, a woman about my age, looked at me with what I now recognize was an expression of concern and quiet recognition. She didn't say anything. She just processed the transfer and gave me a copy of the receipt and said, have a good rest of your day, ma'am. The cabin was easier than I thought. My grandmother's original will did contain the marital protection clause. My cousin filed the paperwork with the county within 10 days. By the end of May, the cabin was back in my name only. My husband never knew because the cabin was something we visited maybe twice a year and never discussed. The investment account took longer. My cousin had a contact, a forensic accountant in Charlotte who did contract work for divorce cases. I won't go into the details of how she found what she found because I don't fully understand them myself, but 2 weeks after she started looking, I had a folder. The folder contained statements from a brokerage account opened in my husband's name 8 months earlier. Over the course of those 8 months, he had transferred a total of $186,000 from our joint account into it, in increments small enough to fly under my radar. The account had grown to just over $210,000 because he'd invested it relatively well, which I will admit briefly enraged me on a level beyond the betrayal itself. The day I got that folder, I sat in my car in the parking garage of the forensic accountant's office and I screamed. I screamed until my throat hurt. Then I drove home and made dinner. Around this time, my husband started doing something that confirmed everything. He started talking about the future. Not our future, the future. He started saying things like, once I'm fully recovered, I think we need to have a real conversation about what we want. He started saying, I think we've grown in different directions, and that's nobody's fault. He started saying, I'll always be grateful to you, but gratitude isn't the same as love, and you deserve to be loved the way you deserve to be loved. He was rehearsing his exit speech on me. I want you to understand that. He was a man who had taken everything I had to keep himself alive and was now, 6 weeks into his recovery, gently coaching me toward accepting that our marriage was over because we had simply grown apart. He was setting up the narrative he was going to use with our families. He was the noble, grateful, slightly tragic husband who had survived a brush with death and emerged understanding that life was too short to stay in a marriage that no longer worked. I would smile at him during these speeches. I would nod thoughtfully. I would say, "I hear you. I think we need to keep talking about this." He looked relieved every time. Then one Tuesday in early June, his college girlfriend came over for the third time. I knew she was coming because I had checked his phone again that morning. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a banana bread. My husband had told me he was having a physical therapy consultation on the back patio with a friend who was a PT. I left the house at 1:45 to go to the grocery store. I drove around the block twice and parked across the street at 2:10. I sat in my car and I watched my husband, on my back porch, holding the hand of the woman who had been planning to take my house, my cabin, my money, and my life. They were laughing about something. He brought her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles. I drove away. I went to a coffee shop in Noda. I ordered a large iced coffee that I didn't drink. I called my cousin and I said, "I'm ready." The next morning, I met with the divorce attorney my cousin had recommended. She was a woman in her early 60s named, she was the kind of woman who walked into a room and the temperature dropped 2 degrees in the best possible way. I gave her the folders, the bank statements, the brokerage statements, the text messages, the photos, the email to the financial planner from 6 weeks before his collapse, the screenshots of my husband and his college girlfriend's communications about my assets, the proof that he had been preparing to leave me for nearly a year and had used my willingness to save his life as the vehicle for the largest single transfer of wealth he was going to extract from me. She read for 45 minutes without saying anything. Then she looked up and said, "I want to make sure I understand. You sold your trust to pay for the kidney transplant that saved this man's life, and you have evidence he was planning to leave you for his previous girlfriend before the transplant happened. And you have evidence he transferred over $180,000 of joint marital money into a private account, and you have evidence he was discussing receiving the remainder of your liquidated trust as a gift to a third party." I nodded. She said, "Sweetheart, we are going to take him to the ground." The filing happened on a Thursday. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the process server rang the bell. My husband answered the door, still moving slowly, still in the soft cotton clothes I had bought him to be comfortable post-surgery. He took the envelope. He read the first page. The color left his face. He looked up at me. I was making tea. "What is this?" he said. I poured the hot water carefully over the bag. "It's the divorce filing," I said, "and the motion for emergency asset freeze, and the petition to recover the funds you transferred into your private brokerage account without my knowledge or consent, and the demand to restore the original deed structure of the Linville cabin, which I've already handled separately, and the motion to recover damages for fraudulent inducement during a medical emergency." Did I miss anything? He sat down on a kitchen chair very slowly because of his incision. "Honey," he said. "Don't call me that," I said. "How long have you known?" "Since the day after your surgery. I came to bring you soup. You and your college girlfriend were having a conversation in your recovery room about everything that was hers now. I was standing in the doorway. You didn't see me. I left." He stared at me. He started to cry. Not the tears of a man who was sorry. The tears of a man who realized he had badly miscalculated. "I was going to take care of you," he said. "I was going to give you a fair settlement." "You were going to give me a fair settlement out of money that was already mine," I said. "Money I sold my grandfather's trust to access. Money I gave you because I thought you were dying and I loved you. You were going to hand me back a slice of my own life and call yourself generous. It's not what you think," he said. "I will tell you that this is the line that has haunted me the most. Not because I believed it, but because of how reflexive it was. How automatic. He had no plan B. He had no real defense. He just said the thing men say when they get caught and waited to see if it would work." I picked up my tea. I walked into the living room. I sat down on the couch where I had slept for 3 weeks taking care of him. I called my mother-in-law on speakerphone. She picked up on the second ring. I told her in even tones what I had found. The investment account, the text messages, the conversation in the recovery room, his college girlfriend on our back porch. I told her she would receive copies of the documents within the hour because I'd already had my attorney prepare a packet for her. There was a very long silence. Then she said, "Put my son on the phone." I held the phone out to him. He took it with a shaking hand. She said his full name, the way mothers do when their grown children are in trouble. She said, if a single word she has said is true, you will tell me right now. He didn't speak. She said, I need you to understand something. I am 68 years old. I have buried a husband. I have raised 3 children. I will not be the mother of a man who steals from his wife while she's busy saving his life. So you tell me the truth right now, and we will go from there. But I am not going to defend a lie. He whispered, it's complicated. She hung up. 3 hours later, she was at our front door with 2 of his cousins and a U-Haul. She didn't speak to him. She spoke to me. She said, tell me what's yours. I'll have the boys move it to my house tonight. You don't have to stay another night in this house with him. I told her there was very little. Just clothes, books, my grandmother's pearls, the dog. She nodded. The boys started carrying boxes. My husband stood in the hallway and watched. He said her name once. She didn't turn around. She just kept directing his cousins, telling them which lamp was mine, which framed photograph, which kitchen plates. She knew. She'd been at my bridal shower. She'd helped me unwrap them. That night, I slept in her guest room. Biscuit slept on the floor next to me. My mother-in-law brought me a mug of decaf tea and sat on the edge of the bed and said, he was always the easiest of my children. I used to worry I'd done a bad job because he never struggled the way the others did. I think I see now what I missed. I didn't know what to say to her. I just took her hand. The divorce took 11 months. He fought it for about 6 weeks, and then his attorney got hold of the forensic accountant's report and the email to the financial planner and the photos from the recovery room hallway. After that, he didn't fight anything. He signed every page my attorney put in front of him. We recovered every cent of the funds he had moved into the private account. The cabin remained mine. I retained the entirety of the remaining trust money. He kept his salary, and his car, and the small amount he'd had in his own checking before all of this started. We sold the house and split the proceeds according to who had paid what into it, which was a calculation that left him with about $9,000. I did not pursue criminal charges, though my attorney told me I had grounds. I did not contact his college girlfriend to confront her. I let her keep her bewildered, polite, neutral smile somewhere out in the world where I would never see it. He kept the kidney, of course. There is no version of this story where I would have wanted otherwise. I think about that a lot. I think about how that kidney came from a stranger's husband in Houston, from a chain that started with a woman whose teenage son got to keep growing up. I think about how my money paid for that chain to reach my husband. I think about how he is walking around right now, in his next life, with an organ inside him that exists because of me. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it's the strangest, most surreal fact of my entire life. I gave him the rest of his life and he tried to take what was left of mine, and the only thing I really lost in the end was the version of myself that thought love made you safe. I moved to the cabin in Linville. I took 6 months off work. I learned to bake bread, badly. I walked Biscuit on the same trail every morning until I knew every rock. I cried in front of the wood stove. I called my mother-in-law every Sunday because she asked me to and because I think we were both grieving the same person, just from different sides of him. In October, almost a year after the transplant, I got a text from my husband. It said, I know I don't deserve to ask, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly. I don't expect anything back. I read it twice. I didn't respond. I drove into town the next morning and got my hair cut shorter than I'd worn it since college. I bought a bottle of good bourbon. I came back to the cabin and I sat on the porch with Biscuit and I watched the leaves come down over the mountain. I thought about what I would say if I ever did respond. I had 100 different versions of it. I had angry ones and sad ones and ones that pretended I was over it. In the end, I never responded. Because the thing I most wanted to say to him was something he would not understand, even if I said it perfectly. The thing I most wanted to say was that he had given me something accidentally in the worst possible way that I would never have found otherwise. He had given me back to myself. I am 29 years old. I have a cabin in the mountains and a dog who snores. I have a mother-in-law. I still call my mother-in-law because I don't have a better word for her. I have a job I'm starting again next month at a nonprofit in Asheville. I have a savings account that is mine alone. I have an attorney's number saved in my phone for the rest of my life. And I have the memory of a hallway with 36 leaves on the wallpaper where I learned the most important thing anyone has ever taught me. The person who promises to spend the rest of his life making it up to you is sometimes the same person who is already counting what's left of yours. I learned to count first. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in any cosmic sense, just the plain mechanics of it. Every choice I made before that hospital hallway came from love, and every choice he made came from calculation. We were not running the same race. He had been preparing his exit for nearly a year while I was preparing his survival. The math of that imbalance was always going to land somewhere, and it landed in a recovery room with 36 leaves on the wallpaper. What I learned, sitting in my cabin in Linville with Biscuit asleep on my feet, is that love without clear eyes is just a slow surrender. I gave my husband everything because I believed his promises, and I believed his promises because I had never made myself check. I had never looked at his phone. I had never asked about the unexplained transfers in our joint account. I had never wondered why he started seeing a financial planner. I didn't know. I called that trust. It wasn't trust. It was a refusal to do the work of seeing the person I'd married. Trust is something you build with evidence. What I had was hope wearing trust's coat. The strength I found in those 11 months of the divorce did not come from anger, though I had plenty of it. It came from being willing to sit at my kitchen table and write down what was real even when what was real broke my heart. It came from calling my cousin instead of crying. It came from being the perfect wife for 6 more weeks because my attorney told me to, while inside my chest something was rebuilding itself out of harder material. Nobody told me that grief and strategy could happen in the same body at the same time. They can. I was the proof. I think the deepest thing I want anyone watching this to understand is that goodness without wisdom is not virtue, it's bait. I was good, I was loyal, I was generous. And those qualities, untethered from any clear-eyed assessment of who I was being good to, almost cost me everything I had. The lesson is not to stop being good. The lesson is to keep your eyes open while you do it. Generosity is not the same as blindness. Loyalty is not the same as silence. Love is not the same as letting someone rewrite the terms of your life without telling you. My mother-in-law said something to me one Sunday on the phone last winter. She said, "The best people I've known in my life had a soft heart and a sharp mind, and they never confused which one was for which job." I wrote it on an index card and taped it to my refrigerator. I read it most mornings. The kidney inside my husband will outlive whatever shame he's capable of feeling, and that's fine with me. I gave him his life. He gave me back mine. The transaction wasn't fair, but the result is. I will spend whatever years I have left being soft where it matters and sharp where it counts, and I will never again confuse the two.